every single week somebody was having an accident. Somebody was like a friend of a friend was dying. We'd see an accident, and then everybody starts messaging each other. Hey, was this you? Like,
good morning, pilots. Good morning, aviation community. Today I'm sitting down with Nick Kostick. You may know him as Smash and Go on Instagram. He does more than make just funny videos. Today he's giving us an interview and some information regarding his company, Navi AI. So I'm super excited to sit down with Nick, and we're definitely going to learn some things today on how he plans to help make aviation safer for all of us. Welcome, Nick.
awesome. Yeah, thank you. Great to be here.
Thank you for having me in to enjoy this beautiful view you've got of the city and all the hard work that you guys are doing. First of all, what got you into aviation?
I started flying 15 years ago in South Africa, in Cape Town. Yeah. So the whole idea was like me and my dad were gonna do a little trip through Africa, and I was gonna go get my pilot's license. And him and my brother sponsored my whole thing, my whole flight training there. That's when I first started, and then immediately fell in love with it. Right. I flew for a while there. Moved to the States like 12 years ago. Used to make video games. Moved to New York. Stopped flying for a little bit, and then moved to the Bay Area. Got my pilot's license. Got back into training again. And then the second time I fell in love with aviation was when I was flying into the Sierras over here. That was like a whole other experience, right? This was always like drawing me, aviation all the time, right? So I started my Instagram channel, started making funny reels, got a huge following there, built up a huge community. But what started happening was the more my community grew, the more I started noticing is like every single week somebody was having an accident. Somebody was like a friend of a friend was dying. We'd see an accident, and then everybody starts messaging each other. Hey, was this you? Like, are you okay? And stuff. And you're like, no, this is a problem. And then I sit back and I'm like, well, what is the problem here, right? Why is it so dangerous? So like, engines quit on us all the time, right? We're flying these machines from like the 1960s. That's one problem, obviously. There's not much I can do about that. I'm not not a mechanical engineer. But then the other problem is, I was looking at the stats, and I'm like, the safest group of pilots is the student solo pilots. That's like the safest segment, right? And the reason is like, well, how can that be possible? They're the least experienced pilots, right? But the reason is because they are the most proficient, right? They have done all of their maneuvers. They're the most proficient in that airplane with the landings. They're also supervised by their CFI. So they don't go out flying in conditions that they cannot handle, right? So I'm like, okay, well, when does this actually become a problem? Well, it becomes a problem when you leave your CFI at about like 50, 60 hours and you go out and start flying on your own. And that's why I like stumbled upon the killing zone and the whole concept of like, your experience hasn't really caught up with you yet, but you're going out there and pushing boundaries and you're getting less and less proficient. And that's where most accidents happen.
What made you think of, come up with the idea to develop Navi AI?
So the whole idea was like, hey, can we build, like inspired by Iron Man, it was like, can we build a Jarvis for pilots that can be your like CFI that's with you all the time and keep you proficient? Going to these hackathons at the AGI house here in Hillsborough, where like, hundreds of like the smartest people in the Bay Area come together, engineers, and they hack together on projects. So I was like, let me host a hackathon there. That's why I met Vivek, my co-founder. He was living there. So I got people from NASA, people from SpaceX. I got all the best AI engineers. I got pilots. And I'm like, hey guys, I did a speech. I'm like, these are the problems in aviation. Let's figure out how we can address them. And people hacked together for a day, like super smart guys. They came up with, somebody built an app that was like, it was called like Better Call ATC. You can like call an ATC AI controller and like practice your ATC calls. Another guy built a thing that would like assess all the NTSB reports and figure out like what the most common trends are. And then I was thinking, okay, well, AI is not inherently intelligent. It's a little bit of a gimmick, but it's really good at looking at unstructured data and making sense of it. So yeah, just raised some money, hired all the like smartest people from there, and moved into like this small space and got to work, right? That's how the whole thing started.
Another thing we wanted to talk about really quickly is Navi is actually putting on a landing challenge, partnering with Flight Dogs over at Hayward Executive Airport here in the Bay. Let's tell us a little bit more about that. Give us some details on the landing challenge.
Yeah. So we're going to set it up. There's going to be about 100 people there. We're going to set up, barbecue, music, have a fun time. And then we got the Flight Dogs planes. Each one will come with a CFI. And we'll have, student pilots, private pilots, all experience levels going out and trying to do their best spot landing. Everyone's going to get 3 attempts. Navi's going to analyze it and pick a winner. We're going to have a trophy for the winner. We're also going to do some challenges in the simulator as well. So we're going to put people in, in emergency scenarios, see how they react. And and we're going to do a parking challenge too. When you bring your plane back, see if you can get it like right on the line. So just like a fun event for everybody. Figured, Hayward, everybody can kind of drive to. If they're not flying in, you can fly in too. But yeah, we'll sponsor the planes and everything, the CFIs, and it's just going to be a fun day.
That sounds amazing. All right. Well, I'm definitely going to be there. If you're a Bay Area pilot, fly in, drive in, come check it out. It's going to be a fun event. Let's see what your landings look like. Let's see how well you taxi and park. Come have a good time. Aviation is all about community. And that is one of the things that Nick has been building here in the Bay as well. Flying around, meeting a bunch of different people. That is my main mission in aviation, is to build community. So we will see you guys next week, March 22nd, 11 to 5 at Hayward Exec. Come on out, show me what you got. What were the steps and initial struggles in getting Navi off the ground?
What we did was we could pretty much figure out what happened in the cockpit. Like you've got, when an air crash happens, they investigate the black box data, and you have experienced CFIs and experienced people, safety people looking at this data, and they create a report. You can do that live for every single flight and kind of paint a picture of what's going on. But then what do you really do with that? That's just an observation. And AI isn't inherently good at doing that. So we had to train it to give the right response. And then we went to one CFI and he gave us one piece of advice. We went to another CFI, he gave us another piece of conflicting advice here. So we're like, well, who do we listen to, right? And how do we structure this? And that's where the problem in aviation is. There's a lot of tribal knowledge. And as much as we have like the ACS and all of these rules, they don't really cover most of the cases, right? So CFIs are out there learning from other CFIs, and there's a lot of like missing information here. That's why you get conflicting. There isn't one response to one thing.
Right.
So that's why we're like, okay, well, let's take a step back and let's go to the largest flight schools in the world, the ones that are most efficient, that produce the most airline pilots, that have standardized a lot of these things, and let's train the model on that. All right. So yeah, we had to standardize the whole thing essentially. So we're at a point now where we can assess exactly what happened in the cockpit and give you corrective feedback on that. This is process that's we process like thousands of hours now. We're training our model. It's getting smarter. AI is moving into a place where a year or two from now it's going to be able to give you better advice than an actual CFI, right? On this. But I mean, flight training is intricate. Like, we're not replacing CFIs. We're not replacing pilots anytime soon. Like Vivek, my co-founder, he was used to build autonomous helicopters, autonomous trucks, and he left that because he's like, this is 20, 30 years away until we get there, right? So we're still going to need pilots. We're still going to need CFIs, but like, where can we step in to help with this in the meantime, right? And with all these accidents happening, we're like, hey, maybe we can identify trends when you're starting to develop bad habits and correct those before they become issues, right? And that's where AI is really good, because it can look at all of this data that's like super non-formatted, non-structured, and make sense of it, right? So yeah, we built an app that just plugs into your avionics, and it's pretty much like your CFI that you take with you, at all times. It creates a report for you, and it can tell you where you're not proficient and what you need to practice.
This sounds like something that came about from your own pilot training.
Yeah.
Like, you streamlined a process that you had when you were training.
Yes.
You probably recorded your flights, went back, spent hours listening to, watching, and then would take notes.
Exactly.
So essentially, Navi is doing that for you, for all those student pilots out there who record their flights and have detailed notes.
Yeah.
This is able to do that in a fraction of the time.
Exactly. So here's the thing. Yeah, exactly. That was my experience, watching back the videos, taking notes. The problem, and I didn't know at the time, and then, reading studies, realized that, especially as a private pilot, as soon as you land, you've forgotten 50% of what you learned, right? The moment you land. A day later, that goes down to 30%. A week later, it goes down to as little as 2%. You're not retaining the information. There's cognitive load because you're stressed.
Right.
You can get stressed to the point that even you do not register that the CFI is speaking to you, right? Because you're so overwhelmed. It's like that whole thing that they say you're like drinking out of a hose pipe, right? Because you haven't, automated a lot of these things. There's a lot going on. So the problem is, and that's part of the problem why students don't take 45 hours to get their private. They take like double. It's like 85, right?
Right.
Is that they have to go back and keep repeating these things. And we're like, well, why do you have to, only do it with the CFI there with the engine running? Why can't you, study this at home? And people recommend chair flying, right?
Right.
That's awesome. Chair flying is so good that if it's done incorrectly, you can actually like damage you can do damage to your training, right?
Right. You build incorrect muscle memory.
Exactly. So that's another factor here, and something else we built with like a procedural trainer is like, well, why do you have to wait? Drive to the airport, like brief with the CFI, fly out to the practice area, practice an engine out scenario one time, where you can just practice it with the AI like 1,000 times sitting at home, and then when you get to it, you can just perform, right? So yeah, that was like one of the major issues is that you had to go back and like keep redoing these things. And then as a private pilot, you don't even know what you're supposed to be learning. You don't know what you don't know.
Right.
That's the problem. So this essentially debriefs it for you, tells you, everything that happened on the flight, immediately refreshes that information. But then there's the other step of like, it's not enough to read the information, you have to engage with it. So that your brain, that's another thing, is like your brain needs to engage with the content and be asked to recall it in order for your brain to go, I have to store this into my long-term memory.
Okay.
Right. Because your brain now knows, okay, I'm gonna be asked this in the future. So and that's how your brain essentially stores this information. So that's what we're doing now, is like we're debriefing the flight and then engaging with you and being like, hey, how do you think the flight went, right? What do you think you could have done better here? So by engaging you in this on like a constant basis, we're making sure that you're committing all of this stuff to memory. That's the theory, at least.
Right.
So, it's almost like your companion, or like it's CFI that you have in your pocket 24/7. It's nowhere near being able to replace a CFI, but what we're noticing is like CFIs don't have time to debrief also, especially at these like Part 141 schools. They've got like 10 minutes tops before they need to go into the other flight.
Right.
So they just go through, okay, this was wrong, and then the student just sits there going, okay. They don't even, they're so tired, after their flight, they don't even register it. So this gives them a chance to like go back home, debrief, go through it, study for it, and the whole idea is here, like make flight training more accessible,
right?
Make flight training easier, alleviate the stress. It's also stressful, right, to go through flights. It's an emotional roller coaster. Oh. So just knowing like what to expect, being able to prepare for your lessons, just kind of guiding the students through that journey. We think it's going to make it a lot more accessible. So yeah, that's the idea.
Okay, awesome. That's extremely useful. So let's say I get back my debrief from the program, right? And it tells me, hey, you had an issue with, say, your short field landing, or there was a problem with, what was the main maneuver I struggled with up in the air? One of the flight maneuvers I struggled with in the beginning was, say, like your steep turns, right? Does the program have any information or something where it says, all right, here's what you struggle with, here's some stuff you should look at to learning it?
This is where AI can look at the whole steep turn. Because if you use traditional tools, you just look at the aviation data, you can tell very easily a steep turn was off. It was 30 degrees instead of 45. But what does that really give you as a student, right? You're like, okay, but why, right? What did I do? Did I just like not add enough back pressure? Did I not add enough power? What is it? And that's like the difficult part, right? So the AI is able to figure that out with all of the training that we've done. And now that it identifies the core issue, then it can go ahead and teach you how to do it the right way. And the way that it does that now is it'll provide you resources. So it'll immediately find, there's tons of like, you produce content yourself. You can get your private with just like, watching YouTube videos. You don't have to read a single book because the content is so good out there. So it finds the relevant content for you that's going to help you. So you don't have to go down this YouTube rabbit hole to find something that's specific to your plane and like, to specific to your problem. And it finds those resources for you. It teaches you how to do it. It links you to the ACS, to the PHAK. And that was important for us, is that we can't let this AI go rampant and give like random advice.
Right.
So we always have to tie it to specific, FAA-approved material, right? And if it doesn't match that, we can't really give that advice, because AI is, prone to hallucination. If you used it for any amount of time, you would have gotten like a random answer back.
Right.
It's it's not great at that. So that was like our main thing is like, restrict its knowledge so that it, always gives back the right response. Yeah, it's getting smarter as we go along, but that's been kind of like the main challenge for us, and like identifying exactly what the problem is.
Amazing. So you also mentioned there that Navi also has information in terms of the ACS. It's dialed into that.
Mhm.
So is one of your plans to kind of, or is maybe that's already been developed, is one of your plans to kind of create a syllabus
Mhm.
for flight training to kind of
Yeah.
standardize that, because it's different everywhere you go, a different CFI, a
Exactly.
different flight school. Where is that?
Exactly. So right now we work with like the top flight schools in the world, the four or five of the top flight schools. But it really depends on the student themselves and their progress, right? So we want to standardize that too. So we want Navi to be, the benchmark in terms of syllabus, and we want it to adapt to the student, right? Because sometimes in the syllabus, the problem is like you got to complete these 4 things, right?
Mm-hmm.
You might complete like 2 of them really well. One could be kind of bad, and the 4th maybe you didn't get to, so that needs to go into like the next lesson. So we're trying to standardize this and like personalize or tailor it to you so that the syllabus evolves with you and it's like the most efficient route. Because there isn't one specific, like that's what we like with the Department of Defense, what we learned very early on is like in their research too, they want to standardize these things so that they can, build, they can create as many pilots in the shortest time possible, right? That's their goal. And then they realize that like, well, it's not one standard syllabus for everybody because everybody's brain works differently. So it's got to be tailored to that. And this is very hard to do. That's very easy to do if you have an amazing CFI working very closely with you and they know you and like, how you fly and they can tailor it to you.
Right.
But then those guys are A, hard to find, and B, it's really expensive, right?
Yes.
So if we can like democratize that in a sense and then empower CFIs, and empower the students themselves, that they can just use Navi for their flight training, and it's always going to be like tailored to them.
Awesome. That's definitely very unique. And I noticed one of the things as I was looking on your website, you were talking about the struggle and challenge for having a good CFI, just like you mentioned, was that the route of a CFI, the job as a CFI has almost become a stepping stone to the next level of being a pilot, flying professionally as a corporate pilot or off to the airlines.
Yes.
Throughout COVID, recent years, it was typically they hit that 1,500 mark. There were job openings pretty much everywhere, gone almost immediately, like a thief in the night.
Yes.
And now as the student pilot, you move on to another CFI, right? Because that's what you got to do to finish your training. But they don't know you. They don't know where you are, what you've been taught. So they kind of have to start over. Now you've gone back 3 or 4 lessons that maybe and your training just got that much more expensive.
Exactly. And that's exactly what happened to me. That's exactly what happened to every single person. Because flight training takes so long, the chance of your CFI leaving and you having to find a new one. It's also like an emotional roller coaster as well, right?
Right.
Because everything's different for you. You have to learn, like, they teach in very different ways as well, right? So you do go back, like, quite a bit. You might have to, like, even if you're post-solo, you might have to prove to them that you can solo again, right? To the new CFI. Exactly. That's exactly what happened to me. So I went from like a military pilot that was a career CFI, and then decided to change their career to like go to the airlines, right? So left me after my solo, made sure that I soloed, and then I changed over to another CFI who was good, but he was like 300-hour CFI that was looking to just build his hours and like tick the check boxes, and like everything changed. My flying suffered. He wasn't like in it, right? He wasn't passionate about teaching. It's not his fault. He doesn't want to be a CFI. He just wants to get his hours built to the airlines. He can't afford to do it any other way, right? So doesn't have a choice, and it's not really passionate. Like he tried his best, but he's not really a teacher. So my flying like suffered. It took me way longer to get my private, and I actually started like not liking it as well. So that's the problem. It's not that anybody's like this. Sure, they CFIs that take advantage of you and all of this, but I think most have good intentions. It's just that they're not really passionate about this, right? And they also don't get paid a lot.
That is very true. Depending on where they are, if they're at a big, busy school, your CFI may be making $26 an hour, even though you're being billed $100, $120 an hour for their time.
And
So
and the schools themselves are taking, like, not to go on a rant here, but the schools themselves are taking advantage of this too, right?
Right.
Because they're like, we don't have to pay them much because they're there to build their hours.
right, and
they
we're
know
busy, so they're going to come to us because they're going to get the hours faster than going to, say, a Part 61 school where they work the pricing out with the students themselves for their time, and maybe instead of getting 40 hours a week or 60 hours a week, they're only getting 10. They make $80 an hour, but you're getting 10 hours. It's going to take you forever to get to 1,500.
Exactly. And I mean, I speak to, hundreds of student pilots, and everybody has the same thing. And it's like, well, what do you guys do to study? So they're like, well, we go fly, see if I kind of tells us what's wrong, and then we go home, and then we watch YouTube videos, right? So like, how can, like, we're training to be pilots, we're paying so much for it, and we're learning off of YouTube, right?
Right.
Because the CFIs don't have time to teach us.
And it's expensive. Ground time is still $60 an hour on the ground for them to teach you, in theory, something that you can find on YouTube, or if you just review the ACS and the FAR aim, it's in there.
Yes.
You can read it all yourself. Most students have never seen the ACS or looked at it until they get to their check ride.
Yes.
And at that point, you're at your check ride. Now you're like, oh, the ACS, that's what the check ride is. I'll go look at it now.
Yeah.
And it's literally just step-by-step everything. So if you're a student pilot, print out the ACS and read through it. Yeah. And when you're going over stuff with your CFI, you can go, okay, that's this in the ACS, right? And now it makes you that much more proficient, as well as it's like your roadmap from start to finish.
Yes, exactly. And that's the thing. And we have an 80% dropout rate from flight training, right?
Right.
It's not because it's hard. People say it's because it gets expensive, but why does it get expensive? Because it's not efficient. And people say that, you lose, there's that post like solo plateau where you like kind of lose interest in it and whatever. And those are all true things. But the reason that happens is because you're kind of lost. You don't know what you're doing. You're out there, you like fly with your CFI. You don't really know like what went wrong. You don't know what the next steps are. You go home, you try to like piece it together on YouTube and, with the books and stuff. There isn't like, Part 141 is different, right? But that's like more expensive, and that's like, you got to commit more. So it's a little bit better in that sense that it keeps you like on track. But like you don't know at any given time, like, how you're progressing, where you're at. You don't get any motivation. It's like, it's hard as is. So we want to be like that assistant for the student pilots that we, guide them through this,
Right.
And just make it like transparent, like what is the next step? Because like you don't know what you don't know. A lot of people get into flight training and they're like, oh, they think they can just show up to the lesson, and that's fine until you get to your solo.
Right.
And post solo, it's like, whoa, I actually have to like study and do all of this stuff.
Oh,
that's
man.
where like most of the drop-offs happen.
Yeah.
But like I wouldn't say everybody, but a lot of people I meet want to become pilots, right? Most don't even get to the stage of like the discovery flight because they don't know like what the process is. And this is where like people like you on your social media, as well, and like a lot of other these channels, like they give insights into that, and they make it more approachable. Like, oh, okay, I can like already start with my ground school. Oh, I got to do my discovery flight. This is the process. And like when people are armed with that knowledge, they know how to proceed and what to do.
Right.
Otherwise, it's always like you've got tons of people, like millions of people saying, "I'll get my private one day," and they never do it.
Right.
Because they don't know where to start.
Information overload. There's so much going on. You don't know where to begin. They call it analysis paralysis, right?
Yes.
Where you spend all your time analyzing and looking and this, that, and the third. You just get so overwhelmed. You go, you know what? Screw it. Never mind.
Yes.
Yeah.
And what actually got me to like get into it is I found an online ground school. I'm like, whoa, you can do this online. That was like my first thing. And they had like some free trials. So I'm like, oh, let me just do it. And then I started watching it and studying, and it had some instructions. Oh, you got to go get your discovery flight. I'm like, okay, that's the next step. Let me go do it. And then I kind of obsessed over it, and I figured out how to do it. And that's how everybody that got their private is somebody that obsessed over it. Nobody went through it like kind of casually because it's impossible.
It would take too long.
It's impossible to navigate, you know? And then all of this, and then you realize, oh, my lessons are being canceled all the time for weather, and then my CFI is not available, and they're sick, and they've moved. There's like so many challenges. It's so hard to start, and it's like so hard to stick to it.
Right.
You know?
Especially seasonally, right? We're in the Bay Area. We're in the middle of winter right now. There's been a storm this weekend, right? It's been raining for the last 3 days. You have to cancel flights. Then you've got weather problems, wind. So there's tons of reasons why you can't fly as a student. And the more those pile on, the longer you go without flying. You have life, you go on trips, you've got work events, whatever. then you regress. And that
Yes.
ups the price, it ups the time, and of course it ups the frustration.
Yeah. It's like, so our team, everybody that's not a pilot already, like we sponsor their flying and their training. Right?
Awesome.
So we got like Akshay here who's been here for like 6 months. He's got like 4 hours. So he's got everything paid for him, and he's still hard to find the time, and
Get your shit together, man.
it's difficult, right?
Yes.
It's really difficult.
100%.
It's like most of your lessons get canceled, at least half of them.
Yeah.
For one reason or another. And then like finding it, and like these schools also, they're like long wait lists and stuff. So anyway, not to go on a rant, but it's difficult, and like you need assistance through it, and that's where we start, trying to step in and help, beyond like what we're doing with the Air Force and the schools, which is like a whole other thing, but like in GA, that's like what's really needed, right?
Right. All pilots start kind of the same. It's basically GA. You're going to be flying a Cessna or the equivalent.
Yes.
And that's your introduction into flight training. That's where you're going to learn your good habits, your bad habits, and there's certain things that will stick with you.
Yes.
How are we best going to integrate Navi into that from here?
The key here is just building that whole ecosystem. And what we're working on now is like with your CFI, them having access to all of your flights, how you're doing, managing your next flight lesson, integrating all the syllabus, just making kind of like a assistant platform for CFIs and students to manage all of this, because CFIs are struggling too, right?
Yes.
Finding students, huge issue for them, because students are also dropping out, so they always have to keep a constant supply. They can't train more than like 5 students at a time. It's too much. And then they have to, do all this manually. They're like texting their students the debrief and sending them, videos, and they're using, Google Calendar and spreadsheets to like keep track of all of this for the ones that do, right? And then you get the CFIs who come to the lesson and they're like, oh, cool, so we're doing steep turns. And you're like, nope, we did that last week. It's like, oh, sorry, like, they don't have any oversight of this. It's hard for students to find CFIs, hard for CFIs to find students. So we want to build a tool that, just is an assistant to training, essentially. Right. And we're almost there. We're there with the debrief part, but there's a lot we need to build. Right.
Okay.
We're building our own ground school as well, so that you can tie all of that in. Essentially, like we want to build an app that's like just this one app that you need for your flight training. That's it. You don't need any of the books. You don't need any of the videos. You don't need any external resources, and it can just like guide you through that process.
Awesome. That sounds very, very useful. So then with the, making Navi the one-stop shop for flight training, what about folks that are like myself? I'm now in what you call the kill zone between 70 hours and 350 hours, where you have enough experience to get the plane up off the ground, but you have more than enough freedom to make all the possible bad decisions and all the mistakes and start to build bad habits.
Well, that's the thing. Yeah. So, we see a lot of mistakes in training, but we see even more in pilots that have been flying, for a while without their CFIs, because your proficiency drops really quickly. That's why, insurance companies want you to be even more proficient than the FAA does, right? Because they're looking at the numbers and they're seeing the accidents, and they're like, okay, well, if you haven't flown for, 60 days, you better go, with either with the CFI, or you better go, do some solo work in order to still be proficient. So the problem here is that, as you leave your CFI in the training environment, your proficiency drops off, because you tend to take, the same routes, you get used to the airport. And then when you come into a situation that you haven't practiced for, such as an engine out scenario, like what you had on your long trip with like, the crazy airspace, you kind of get overwhelmed because you haven't really trained for that, right?
Right.
So where Navi comes in is like it constantly monitors you and it can suggest, things that you need to improve on, right? So what we want to build is just having it do a little stage check for you as well, where it gives you a task, go out there and fly, these maneuvers, and it can assess you, right? So it can just keep you proficient throughout that period, right? That's the whole that's the major plan in terms of like GA pilots that are out there flying, because that's where the major issue is. It's like it's not a problem on a clear day when nothing goes wrong and you go into airports that you've always flown. You almost don't even need to prepare, like you got it. But the moment something's off, it's like pilots are just not prepared for it, and they don't react in time, and they get into trouble, right?
Right.
Yes.
Most pilot accidents don't happen because the plane did something wrong. The plane pretty much does what it's supposed to do 99% of the time. It's because you made a decision to do something you're not capable of doing.
Yeah, exactly. exactly. And that's the biggest problem. And then how do you do that in these like biannual reviews? Like, sure,
But that's every
but
2 years, right?
that's every 2 years.
That's
It's not
24 months of me making mistakes and potentially making bad decisions in the meantime.
Yeah. And I mean, if you look at the data, like Aviation Safety Network, for example, it's like every hour there's like 2 incidents somewhere worldwide, right? And every day someone's dying. Like literally almost every day. If you look at the data, somebody dies in aviation, which is ridiculous, right? It's actually more so like commercial aviation's kind of safe. It's like your chances, whatever. I don't want to butcher the numbers now, but like 1 in a million of like being in a plane that's that has an accident. But when you look at a flight versus a drive to LA in GA, flight's infinitely more dangerous. It's like 1 in 100,000, right? As opposed to like driving is like 1 in every 250,000 or something like that you can have an accident. So yeah, it's maybe not as dangerous as getting onto a motorcycle or something, but it's pretty damn dangerous, and we're just not prepared to handle all of these scenarios at all times, right?
Right.
And a lot of this is to do with the problem with these state checks too. Is that before the state check, the pilot's like, well, they kind of want to pass it, so they prepare, they chafe fly and stuff, right? And then they pass it, but they don't do that every day, right?
Exactly.
And that's kind of the same issue in the airlines. Is like when the pilots do their stage checks, they prepare the night before and they're super proficient, but are they proficient at all times to handle these emergencies, right? The emergencies don't come up that often, right? But when they do, it's they're not
potentially catastrophic.
Exactly.
Right? So we do a great job of studying to pass tests.
Yes.
Not necessarily studying to be the best pilot we can be at all times.
That's my observation. Yeah, and some do, but most don't.
Definitely.
Yeah.
So you mentioned how Navi can kind of give you maneuvers and things to do in the meantime. For me, who has Navi, how would I set that up? Like say, I'm going to go fly. Let's say the weather's nice tomorrow and I decide I'm going to get in the 172 and fly out to the practice area. How do I get Navi to say, hey, Osa, let's work on these maneuvers?
Yeah. So the more you fly with it, the more it knows about you.
Okay.
Right? And it can see your skills degrading. And so, it can see your landings kind of getting sloppy, right?
Mm-hmm.
You're coming constantly too low and you're having to, bump up the power and stuff. Like pilots get lazy, right? I do this too, right?
Right.
I'm not, I don't fly perfectly. I don't do my, call outs and checklists. I sometimes skip my climb checklist. I skip my cruise checklist. I kind of just like glance over at it.
Right.
So it starts to notice these things and these trends, and it's like, hey, this is what you need to brush up on. So it designs the next lesson for you, right? And I've met pilots that do this themselves too. They design little like mock check rides for themselves, and they go out and fly them, right? And they kind of self-evaluate and self-assess. But those are the guys that like really obsess over this, right?
Right.
So the more you fly with it, the more it knows about you, and the more it can tell, hey, this is where you're not proficient anymore. So it sets a little task for you, like maybe you're taking out your family tomorrow, but let's incorporate some of these maneuvers as well, right? Do different landings, land at different airports. So whatever that is that you're not proficient in, it'll set that up for you and kind of like be your guardian angel in a sense, and allow you to practice these maneuvers. So yeah, that's the key. So the more you fly with it, the more it knows, the more it can recommend like corrective actions.
I find myself in that situation that we were talking earlier. I don't necessarily read off every line of my checklist. I might just be looking at it and go boom, 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 boom. But Navi, it's listening to what I'm saying, and it may say, I know my notes from my last flight, it was like, hey, you missed this checklist. Yes. You might want to go through that. It sounded like you were low on your forward slip. So here are some things that you might want to do. And it gave me a few videos. But with the fact that I may not be verbalizing things and it's recording that, it's making me say, okay, let me say these things out loud and verbalize them, which is a great another step. And part of memorization is doing and saying.
Yes,
so
exactly. And that's why if you look at, like commercial operations or like charter operations, the one reason that they don't have...
there's one guy with the checklist looking and reading what other guys doing.
Yeah, exactly. So one reason you don't have accidents is because the planes don't quit on you all the time, like, ours do. But another reason is that they have the procedures in place, right, for all of this stuff, which in GA we don't do. Nobody does. Just go out and fly, right? It's like I can't remember, like before building this and having Navi with me, like I don't remember when I was like verbalizing my checklist and stuff, right? But it's just proven to help, and there's certain ways that you got to fly perfectly like every single time. You never know when, pre-takeoff briefings, for example, meet a lot of people that don't do those. Like emergency briefings, right?
Yep.
what
If
do you
this,
do?
then that,
If this,
500
then
feet.
that.
Uh-huh.
Or if they do it, then they do like the standard one, and they don't really customize it for the airport, like flying out of Hayward, right? You can say, without runway remaining, you're like, well, you're kind of screwed, right?
In the trees, right. There's
Yeah. So like, what do you do in that specific scenario? It just gets you to like think through those things, right? And calls it out for you. So yeah, I mean, that's, if we all followed these procedures and did things, properly, we would, it's, so there's a saying, right? The famous saying is that like, flying isn't inherently dangerous, but it's very, very unforgiving to neglect and not being prepared for every scenario. More so than the sea even, right?
right. Exactly.
Because if you're prepared and you follow the checklists were written in blood, right? Is the saying too.
That's the truth.
So if you follow everything, like everything should be fine. Even an engine out scenario, you can handle that properly if you just follow the right procedures. But it's just like lack of proficiency there, and then one thing leads to another, and you end up in trouble.
Okay. So being that I know it listens to my voice, what is the best way for me to then get the data, actual flight data from the aircraft into the app?
Yeah, it all depends. Like you got different avionics, so G5, G1000, G3X, but we've got we did different ways. We've got like little Wi-Fi SD cards that we stream the data. We're working on a partnership with Garmin now to get the data directly from it. But yeah, you can just pop out. If you're flying a G1000, you can just pop out your SD card and upload it. Right.
Okay.
We're working on having an actual Navi device, like a low cost device that you can just plug into your plane, and it's always there. Right. But you plug into your audio, get the avionics data, and it's got everything that it needs to assess the flight. We're still working on some blind spots that we have and integrating video and stuff like that. But mostly you'll get a pretty detailed debrief of your flight.
Right.
Yeah.
And it records the entire audio as well.
Yeah.
Where are we right now in terms of the overlay of, say, the map or 3D mapping of my flight?
Mm-hmm.
How is that something that is available or something that's being worked on?
Yeah. So we actually, like on our web app, we've already developed that. That's like super important. 2D map doesn't really help you much.
Right.
So we're moving all of that over to the app now, because we realize that pilots, like some pilots, don't even have laptops, right? But every pilot has an iPad or an iPhone.
Right.
So we're moving this over into the app. So it's just way, way, way easier to debrief, because the moment you land, you've got your iPad there. It's available within like your debrief. It's available within like a minute or two of you landing.
Yeah.
And yeah, it's just much more accessible. That was like a huge challenge in the beginning. We built this web app, and like people were like, hey, I don't really have a laptop even.
Right. Yeah, kind of like you were saying, any extra step that people have to do, like, is a friction point in terms of I got to now go use my laptop to do this when my phone is in my pocket at all times. If I'm flying, my iPad is right there, so it's far more accessible and easy. Just pull that up, hit the app, and go, oh, okay, boom, boom, boom.
Yeah.
I think that's amazing. That just hit me with another idea that I'm sure you guys have thought of and already working on. But like, as a pilot, sometimes you're struggling maybe with like your actual pattern in terms of, your altitude turning base, your altitude turning final, looking to hit your point.
Yes.
And that is all based off your airspeed and your altitude.
Yes.
So the ability to go, all right, on your base leg, you are at 80 knots when maybe you should be at 75.
Yes.
You are, at 900 feet and you should be at 8. You're turning final at 650. No wonder you're, far off your point.
Yes.
Now you have to make drastic changes. Is Navi having the ability to log, say, all right, you mentioned, we know you're on base, you're high, you're low on final, or you're high on final, and it took you too long to make said adjustment.
Yeah.
Go around is what you should have done.
Exactly. So funny enough, like the traffic pattern is where flight training happens. Right?
Fact.
Everything else is just going from one point to another, right? Because you have all phases of flight, right? You've got your taxi, you've got takeoff, you've got climb, you've got cruise, you've got descent, and you've got your landing. So it's like the whole flight is in the traffic pattern. And this is arguably like the most difficult part to kind of analyze. That's exactly what, because the problem that we realized was like, we can detect if you've had a bad landing. But now let's take a step back. Like, why was that bad? Okay,
yes.
That was an unstable approach. Why was the approach unstable? Well, maybe your base steering, you were too low, so you had to, bump up more power and stuff. Okay, why were you too low on base? Okay, maybe you started descending,
Right.
too late, or you pulled out too much power. So you kind of work it all the way back. So bad landing as a result, starts from downwind leg, right?
Mhm.
And it could even start from like further beyond that. So
Yeah.
that's where the AI kind of like looks at these steps and goes back and sees, okay, well, what is the real reason your landing was
Mhm.
bad, and then it can correct that for you. Because like the thing that I had, for example, is like I was 30 hours into my training, and my patterns were like terrible, my landings were terrible, and I was like, well, I couldn't figure out what I was doing wrong. So I was like, controlling the plane all the time, like
Yeah.
death grip on this yoke, and I was putting in so much work, and then I was
exhausting.
like, yeah, it's super exhausting, and I couldn't figure it out. So I gave my plane over to my CFI, and he flew the pattern, and he's sitting like this with his arms crossed, and he's just adjusting it a little bit, like even turning with the rudder, and he's like just chatting to me, and the plane's doing a perfect pattern. So I'm like, how the heck are you doing? And that's why I realized like a fundamental thing about it, like aviation, is you're almost, as a pilot, you're like the manager of the airplane's power. That's all you're doing. The airplane's flying itself. So you're just encouraging it into a certain direction and managing the power. And I experience that the same with the guys here at the office. I tell them fly a pattern, and they're doing
You do
this.
too much, right?
And they're like, no, just don't touch the yoke. Just like trim it a little bit. Just like use two fingers, like to touch the yoke. And you're like, you completely chill. Now I can speak to you here, and I can fly a traffic pattern like this.
Right.
And just kind of like glance over there and just adjust it. So that was a lesson that I learned 30 hours in. I wish I'd learned it in the beginning, right? But that's really hard to identify when you're saying, oh, your downwind leg was too fast. This was too, but that's not really the problem. The problem is the fundamental issue is that you haven't grasped that concept. So yeah, some people can be stuck. You get people that haven't soloed at like 100 hours, right? This is probably the CFI's fault, or they're just not cut out for flying. But I think that's very rare. I think everybody can fly, but it's just because the CFI hasn't taught them the right things, right?
Right. Or they themselves don't take the time to study post lesson, right? The CFI can do everything right, but you as a pilot, you still got to put in your time. Every hour you spend flying the plane doing this, you should probably be spending 2 to 3 on the ground, chair flying, going through your checklist, understanding the information and knowledge. The ACS is a lot. Like when you really sit down and look, I'm a pilot, there's lots of stuff I don't know. You start diving into weather, you start diving into, certain pattern entries and certain maneuvers. Like, this is actually kind of uncomfortable. I need to go brush up on this, or call my CFI and be like, hey, can we go talk about this for a minute? Like, this is some stuff. So if you're not like active in your own training, you set yourself up for failure, which like you said, most people are capable of getting it done. Flying an airplane is actually pretty simple and easy.
Yes.
It's a little adjustment here like this, a little adjustment here like this, and the airplane flies beautifully.
Yes.
Right?
Exactly.
It's a mindset. Like, what do you think, being that, you've talked to tons of CFIs, you yourself are a pilot.
Yeah.
What is like the most important, not qualification, but quality that a pilot or a student pilot should have or develop?
I think student pilots are really hard on themselves a lot of the time. And I think a major issue is they feel like they need to come into a lesson and perform and impress the CFI. And they're always falling short of that. And that's where like a lot of the issues are coming up, because they always feel, we speak to other pilots, we know the issues, and this kind of, this mindset changes when you get to your like instrument and commercial. But during private, most pilots feel like they're the worst pilot alive because they're like never performing well. And they come in there, and they come in there to impress their CFI. Instead, what they should do is like just make peace with the fact that they suck and that they're going to suck for a long time, right? They're so focused on getting their landing straight, not knowing that like 300 hours later, their landings are still going to suck, right? So just like relax, and come into the lesson and try and learn, right? So know that you are going to suck, and then ask a lot of questions like, why is this like this? To get to the bottom of like what the core issue is, right? Instead of coming there and just trying to like perform and being disappointed with it and being embarrassed about it. A lot of pilots are just like embarrassed, like, oh, that was terrible landings, and just want to like get out of there and not even like talk to the CFI. And they just like internalize a lot of this. So just be like always ask questions and always figure out how you're going to improve. And I think it takes off a lot of pressure from you when you realize, like, I'm going to suck for the first 300-400 hours anyway. So this is where I'm stuck. This is the reality.
Yeah.
Let me just try and make the most of it and get better. Because it's, unlike driving, we've been, from the moment you're born, you're taken home from the hospital in a car. You're seeing, you learning the sight picture, the motion, how things work. When you get to like 16, all you really need to learn is like a couple of things and you're a driver now. Mm-hmm. With aviation, you've never experienced something like that. Everything's completely new. You got a whole other dimension that you're flying in now.
Yeah.
And it's so confusing. And now you got to put that onto a spot on the runway and to manage the power the right way. Of course, you're not going to be able to do it. But yeah, that's something that I feel, just always be learning, and never get like overconfident, because that's when it gets you. Yeah.
Perfect. So for new student pilots, don't be too hard on yourself. Expect to struggle. I did with landings forever. When I finally got my pattern down and would fly a good pattern, my CFO was like, okay, now you can land. Awesome. Then my round out was terrible. He goes, nope, we're canceling, go around. So it got so frustrating. But when you understand, like, the suck is what makes you better, the suck is what makes you better. And then on the flip side, when you finally do get things down, don't think you're perfect and now I'm such a great pilot, because that's where you get yourself into real trouble.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's, if your lesson didn't suck and everything went perfectly, then you haven't learned anything. You want an uneventful flight when you're, flying with your family or friends or whatever. But in training, you always want to push yourself. And the CFIs always push you, right?
Yes.
The moment you get good at something, they add another thing, every lesson is meant to suck. But yeah.
You're going to be overwhelmed.
Yeah, exactly.
No question. Without a doubt. In what stage of the production process would you put Navi in now compared to like when you would feel like it's more polished than how you want it to be?
I'll never be happy with where it's at, right? And that's always the case of
that's the truth.
Even with artists and art and what you do, I'm sure you never go.
As far as I'm concerned, everything I do sucks. Everything, no matter what it is.
The more I learn about flight training and flying, the more I realize, how difficult it is. And I think Jason Miller also said to me one day, he was like, it's kind of like trying to, grab water or like sand, and it's always slipping through your fingers, right?
Right.
You cannot ever figure out, because there's a lot of human factors involved, It's extremely difficult. And there's a lot of things that are just not documented. We follow the ACS, for example, and everything should be in the ACS. But the moment we try and get a technology to analyze a pilot on a check ride, we notice there isn't a lot of there's a lot that's open to interpretation, right? ACS says, the pilots is clear the area, they've chosen the right landing spot. Like, what does that even mean, right? It's not really clearly defined. Like, what do? Does that mean the pilot, looks out the window, that the DP is not in their minds, and the DPs are like, well, is this something we sort of like, kind of feel if a pilot is ready or not, right? There isn't, there's like a steep turn, and you can be off by, 5 degrees and stuff. When that's a fail, that's simple. But what makes a pilot a safe pilot is very difficult to determine by software, right? Because now you have to say, okay, pilots, taxiing on centerline, right? Okay, what does not taxiing on centerline look like? Is that an inch? Is that 4 inches? Is that 3 feet? Right? And then if the pilot does that, then maybe it's not an immediate disqualification if they're safe in other areas. So how is taxiing off centerline weighed against, your short field landing? And you got to assign like points and weight to all of this. And the moment you try and get technology to look at this, it gets hard, and you realize that even DPs are like, it's really open to interpretation. There's no like one set way. They have to look at the whole picture and determine whether you're a safe pilot, right? On that one day, on that one flight. So yeah, it's really hard to actually nail it down, like what makes a good pilot, and what makes a bad pilot, and what things are bad. So it's like doing your call outs and bouncing your landing and stuff is obviously something that's wrong, and we can detect. But yeah, it kind of goes much deeper than that, and it's really hard to figure out.
Right. Exactly. Like the scanning of the eyes, the active eye scanning. That's not something that.
Yeah, division of attention and all of that, right? okay, what is the, what percentage should you look out the window? What percentage should you look inside?
Right.
Yeah, there's a lot of like blurry areas, and that's what we're trying to figure out.
Wow.
So
That's like trying to find a drop of water in the ocean, like it's everywhere.
It's the more you think about it, the more complicated it gets.
The more robust it becomes, without a doubt.
Yep.
So for now, anybody who is interested in getting Navi as a training aid, how does someone go about doing so?
Yeah, absolutely. So first of all, super AI processing, super expensive, right? Right now, well, we're funding all of it. So we have like a long wait list for this. You can, go like to our website, go navi.ai, or search Fly Navi on the App Store, download the app, sign up. And we're onboarding early access users right now. So these are folks that, since we're going to be, funding all of the AI costs, would love to get feedback from them, right, on the app. So when they go flying, seeing their debrief, so whether it's a CFI, whether it's a private pilot, they can join our community on WhatsApp and kind of, guide us into like what was helpful, what wasn't, right? Because we don't want to sit here for like 6 months in a vacuum and build something we think is useful.
Right.
We want to involve the community and make sure that this is a useful product for all pilots, right? Because that's the only way we build something useful, right? So yeah, if you get on that list, you fly regularly, you're very serious about flying, you're willing to be part of the community and offer feedback, we'll approve your account. You just answer a few questions. We'll send you a little pack with all the recording equipment, so you've got that. And and then we'll maybe even get on a call with you, see how your training's going, get some feedback. So that's the only people we're accepting so far, right? Because we've got a long wait list. Looking to launch very soon, like probably in the next 6 weeks.
Wow.
To launch it to more people once we've worked out all of the kinks. But yeah, for now, early access users, anyone willing to try it out, whether you're a CFI or a student, just sign up.
So in the next 6 weeks, look out for Navi to launch and be more readily available to the public. They're here working hard on it, trying to make aviation safer for the rest of us. Thank you so much, Nick. I got to get you on the podcast one of these days to tell more of your story, more about you in aviation, the fun things you're doing outside of work. It's amazing when you turn your passion, which is aviation, into something bigger. You love flying, but now you saw some inefficiencies in training and want to make it better for others. Turn your flight experience and the things that, maybe you struggled with or didn't like or wish you had, and create that for other people. Yeah. That is amazing. Thank you. Anybody who's not currently following Nick, smash and go on Instagram. Check it out. Navi has a page as well.
Yeah.
So Navi AI.
Navi AI, yeah. Fly Navi AI.
May there always be wind beneath your wings. Peace.